I'm Jennifer Clark, 31 years old. Just a month ago, I thought my life was finally entering a whole new chapter. A chapter of freedom, achievement, and happiness. After 12 years of relentless work, waiting tables, driving deliveries, then eventually becoming a software engineer at a tech company, I had saved up $420,000. No loans, no handouts, just persistence and non-stop effort. I was ready to put down a deposit on my first home, a cozy little house in the suburbs of San Diego, where it's sunny year-round and the backyard is big enough for me to grow vegetables and unwind after long hours at work. It was the dream I'd carried since I was 20, when I left home with nothing but a suitcase of old clothes and a cracked phone. But then, the nightmare hit me out of nowhere. That morning, like any other, I checked my savings account, the one I'd carefully deposited every paycheck into for years. And then I froze. My heart nearly stopped when I saw a zero on the screen. I logged out, logged back in. Nothing changed. Everything was gone. I scrambled to pull up the transaction history, my hands shaking so hard I mistyped the password 3 times. And when I saw the full amount had been transferred to an unfamiliar account, I broke down in tears. Not because of the money, but because of the name on the receiving account. Douglas Clark. My father. I called him immediately. The phone rang once, then went to voicemail. I called my mother. No answer. Texted them. Nothing. I couldn't understand. I truly couldn't. These were my parents, the ones who always said they wanted me to be independent, mature, and strong. But now, that afternoon, while I was still caught between rage and despair, my father finally called back. I immediately put him on speaker. His voice was disturbingly calm. Jennifer, you're so naive. Thanks for working so hard all these years. That money will give your brother, Ethan, a good head start. He needs capital to start his company and to pay for his MBA. The family must prioritize the future. I was stunned. Blood rushed to my head. What future? Whose future? That was my money! I screamed. He just scoffed, coldly. You still don't get it, do you? Family is a unified whole. Your money is our money, and your parents have the right to decide what's best for everyone. I laughed. A long, uncontrollable laugh. Not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I might have lost my mind. The same man who taught me how to track expenses, use a credit card responsibly, and check bank statements was now the one who had stolen everything I'd worked for. You're hearing a story that isn't just about money, but about the deepest kind of betrayal. And if you think I'd just walk away, wait and see. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a pristine white 2-story house on Grant Street, where every wall had heard the sound of my father. Douglas Clark was once a math teacher before becoming a freelance investment advisor. He didn't believe in the idea of a carefree childhood. To him, every child was a long-term investment, and parents were the ones who dictated the project's direction. My mother, Marilyn, was a former flight attendant, now a full-time homemaker who proudly called herself the family's internal operations manager, and she ran the household like a military base. Since I was 8, I had to keep a daily journal, not to express myself, but for my mother to inspect and correct my perception. If I wrote, "I'm sad I got a B+," she'd underline sad and write, "Disappointed is more accurate. Emotions should reflect reality." Every time I went out with friends, if I was allowed, I had to send a selfie every hour as a status report. My phone was bought by my dad, my iCloud account managed by him, and I wasn't allowed to set a password he didn't know. There was no privacy. Even my bedroom didn't have a lock. Once, I wrote a letter to myself and hid it under my pillow, only to find it days later on my desk, marked in red, "Don't harbor negative thoughts alone." In stark contrast, Ethan, my younger brother, was the golden child of the family. He was 3 years younger than me, skipped school to play video games, and still got his meals delivered to his room, with Mom saying he needed space to be creative. Ethan had his own room with a digital lock, triple screen gaming setup, high-end speakers, and a wardrobe like something out of a movie. Me? I once got my phone confiscated for 2 weeks just for texting my best friend. Don't call me Jenny anymore. My name is Jennifer. I'll never forget my 16th birthday. All I asked for was a used car to get to my part-time job. My dad sat across from me, smirking. You're not mature enough to manage a vehicle. A year later, when Ethan turned 16, he immediately got a brand new SUV. When I protested, Mom said matter-of-factly, Ethan needs confidence to grow. You're already too independent. That sentence hit me like a knife. They called me independent. But it was the kind of independence that came with 24/7 surveillance, mental manipulation, and the constant policing of my words and decisions. I never really knew what I wanted because I was never allowed to think for myself. I used to believe they did it out of love, that they wanted me to have a better future. But looking back, that wasn't love. It was control disguised as responsibility. In high school, I began teaching myself how to disconnect from them. Quietly. I spoke less, smiled on cue, and I memorized every move my dad made in managing the household's finances. Every bill, every tax report, every way he tracked my mother's savings like a stock chart. I didn't learn how to rebel. I learned how to disappear. And when I turned 18, I didn't throw a party. I didn't say a word. I just left. On a misty morning, carrying an old backpack, a laptop, and a piece of paper that read, "Don't look for me. I'm not missing. I'm finally living." I walked out that early fall morning without a single goodbye, without a tear shed, and no one ran after me to ask if I needed help. Maybe they thought I'd come back, or they were convinced I'd fail and return ashamed. But I didn't come back. Not once. The first 3 nights, I crashed on the couch of my classmate Lena, the only person who knew I was leaving. She handed me a thin blanket and said, "If you had the guts to walk out of that place, you'll make it." I started working overnight shifts at a gas station on the outskirts of Beaverton, cleaning bathrooms and counting inventory at 3 a.m. The shift manager, Marco, a Mexican-born man, once told me, "Little lady, you work harder than the guys here and they're embarrassed." I smiled, but didn't tell him I had no other choice. Every night after work, I went back to the tiny room I shared with Lena. I stashed my cash in a torn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird I'd found at a used bookstore, not for symbolism, just because it was thick enough not to attract attention. I saved every penny. No Starbucks, no takeout, no Netflix. Anytime I wanted to spend, I reminded myself, this is a step back to leap forward. I enrolled in community college with a partial scholarship. The rest I covered with part-time jobs, sometimes juggling up to 4 in a week. I washed dishes at an Italian restaurant, worked construction on weekends, and repaired old computers for regular clients. By 22, I graduated with honors in software engineering. That was the first time I called my mom, just to tell her I hadn't taken a single cent from them to earn that degree. She didn't respond right away. At the end of the day, I got a short text. "Congratulations, hope it wasn't too hard." It was hard, but it was real. My first job was an internship at a small tech company in Eugene. The pay was modest, but they had stock options and advanced training programs. After 11 months, I was hired full-time. 2 years later, I was promoted to product development lead, overseeing a project that used AI to optimize city traffic networks. I moved to Hillsborough to be closer to the office, splitting rent with 2 coworkers. I still drove the same 2005 Honda I'd bought from a friend. No loans, no reckless credit use. I split my income into 3 parts: expenses, emergency fund, and the largest, my high-yield savings account. No one taught me to do this. I learned from other people's mistakes, especially my parents. I built my own spreadsheets, tracked every cent I spent. I declined vacations, skipped designer brands, and refused to join the spending race. I chose freedom over flash. I set a goal. By the time I turned 30, I'd save at least $400,000, enough to buy a home and have a solid cushion for life's curveballs. Every Monday morning, I opened my financial summary. As the numbers grew from 2 digits to 6, I didn't feel smug. I felt relieved. Every dollar was proof that I didn't need them to survive. I never bragged to my family. My weekly calls with mom always ended within 10 minutes, revolving around small talk like, "Work okay?" or "Your brother was just elected class rep." I'd answer, "I'm fine," and keep the rest to myself. Sometimes I wondered if they had just loved me the way I needed, not the way they wanted, would I have had to sacrifice so much? But then I'd remind myself, maybe I wouldn't be this strong if I hadn't been pushed out of that gilded cage. And in the year I turned 30, after a surprise raise and a few successful freelance contracts, my account balance hit $419,000. I cried, alone in my little apartment, staring at that number on my screen. Not because of the money, but because I had done it. On my own. That was before everything fell apart. 2 months after my 31st birthday, my girlfriend Rachel and I started house hunting. She's an architect, someone who sees potential in every rundown home, while I only see peeling paint and creaky floors. "We can turn this into a real home, Jen," she said, as we stood inside a craftsman-style house in Salem with rusted wooden floors and squeaky windows. I laughed. "As long as it's under 400,000 and not haunted, I'm in." We decided to put down a deposit, the bank had approved the loan, and I planned to transfer the full $419,000 into the escrow account the following week. But it was on that fateful Thursday night, everything began to crack. I was sitting on the sofa, typing my final work email of the day, when a notification popped up from my banking app. "New login from unknown device, 9:42 p.m. I frowned. I hadn't logged in from anywhere except the laptop right in front of me. Rachel was outside on the balcony, watering the plants. I opened the app immediately. Everything looked normal. No charges. No unusual transactions. But my gut told me something was wrong. It had never failed me. That night, I changed my password, enabled two-step verification, and called the bank's security department. A man named Terry confirmed. Yes, there was a login from an IP address that doesn't match any registered devices. I asked them to temporarily lock the account and switch to highlight mode. Terry suggested I check my device for spyware. The moment he said that, a chill went down my spine. I ran a scan on my laptop, the one I'd used for the past 3 years. No viruses detected. But when I used more advanced software to analyze background processes, one unfamiliar program appeared. Syscore Diagnostic Monitor. It sounded legitimate, but I had never installed it. When I searched on security forums, my hand nearly slipped off the mouse. It was professional-grade spyware, often used to log keystrokes, capture screen activity, and even activate the webcam remotely. I suddenly remembered. About 4 months ago, during an Easter visit home, my laptop had been running slow and crashing frequently. My dad, Douglas, had offered to clean it up a bit. "The engineers at my firm use some top-tier optimization tools," he said, picking up my laptop and disappearing into his office for over 2 hours. At the time, I was naive. I even felt touched, thinking he still cared, but now it was obvious. He hadn't optimized anything. He had installed spyware on my machine. I opened the Network Connection Manager and discovered that data from that program had been sent to a private server, an IP address traced back to my parents' house in Corvallis. I felt completely exposed. My bank account, my emails, my personal notes, even my messages with Rachel, everything might have been monitored for months. And right then, my instinct screamed, "Check your savings account." I grabbed my phone, hands shaking. Logged in through two-factor authentication. Balance: $0, 0 cents. I froze. opened the transaction history. One transfer, the full amount, 419,000, and processed at 8:17 p.m. that evening. I zoomed in on the recipient. I couldn't believe my eyes. Douglas Clark. My father. I gasped, soundless. Rachel rushed in when she saw my phone drop to the floor. Jennifer, what happened? I stammered. The money, all of it, my dad, he took it. She grabbed my hand, her eyes wide with concern. We need to call the bank now. Maybe we can stop it. I nodded, tears streaming uncontrollably. Not because I lost the money, but because the person who was supposed to protect me was the one who betrayed me in the most brutal way. I had never felt so stripped bare, so powerless. But I also knew I couldn't collapse. Not this time. The next morning, Oregon was its usual overcast self. But inside me stirred a storm fiercer than anything I'd ever known. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't afraid. There was only a cold clarity in every step I took. Rachel begged, "Let me come with you." I shook my head. He spied on me for months, and I never saw it coming. Today, I need to look them in the eye. Alone. I drove nearly an hour back to Corvallis, down the familiar road to the house where I had grown up under control, silence, and suffocating expectations. I rang the doorbell. My mom opened the door, her face unable to hide the surprise. Jennifer, why didn't you let us know? Is Dad home? I cut her off, my voice eerily calm. She nodded and stepped aside. He's in the study. I walked in, passing the family portrait still hanging in the hallway, my face forever positioned on the edge, like a footnote in someone else's story. My father was seated at his desk, eyes still fixed in that analytical gaze as if he were calculating stocks. When he saw me, he raised an eyebrow. Jennifer! Didn't expect you to drive over midweek. I shut the door. We need to talk. I pulled out my phone and opened the transaction history from the night before. I placed it in front of him. $419,000 from my account. To yours. He didn't deny it, didn't deflect. He just sighed, like I was blowing things out of proportion. You found out sooner than I expected. My fists clenched. Why? My father removed his glasses, speaking slowly like he was giving a lecture. You were about to put all that money into an old brick house in a volatile market. That's a huge mistake. Your mother and I couldn't let you ruin your future over an emotional impulse. My mom walked in then, still holding a cup of tea. Jennifer, you know we've always wanted the best for you. I turned to her, feeling the heat rise to my face. Spying on my computer, breaking into my bank account and transferring all my money. Was that your idea of the best for me? My father responded flatly. That was a family decision. I laughed, a sharp, hollow laugh that chilled the air. Family? What family? Who in this family actually gets a say? Or is it only the ones with the login credentials? My mom set down her tea and sighed. Ethan needs support. He just got into an MBA program in New York. He has a very promising startup idea. This is an investment in the future for all of us, if you just understand. Right then, the front door opened, the sound of shoes tapping lightly on the hardwood floor, and Ethan, my younger brother, appeared in the doorway of the study. What's going on? I saw Jen's car outside. I turned to him, looking him dead in the eye. Did you know? Mom and Dad just took my entire 12 years of savings to invest in you. Ethan froze. What? No, that can't be. He turned to our parents. What are you even talking about? My dad said in an even tone. We used Jennifer's funds to secure your education and startup future. The whole family will benefit. Ethan stepped back. I never asked for money. I didn't know any of this. I was planning to apply for more scholarships. I saw genuine panic in my brother's eyes, and then I realized Ethan was just another piece on their power board. He turned back to me. I swear, Jen, I had nothing to do with this. I would never want that money if it wasn't mine. My mom raised her voice. Ethan, don't speak against your parents. You don't understand the bigger picture. No, you don't, Ethan cut in. For the first time, I heard real conviction in his voice. Did everything on her own. You betrayed her. I stood up. I want 24 hours to return every cent, or I'm going to the police. My father scoffed. You can't drag your parents into court. I looked at him one last time. Watch me. And I walked out of the house that used to be my home, now just the origin of a betrayal masked as love. I left my parents' house with a face like stone, but inside, my heart pounded, not out of fear, but because I knew the real fight hadn't even begun. They thought I'd been taken down, that they'd taken everything, but what they didn't know is that I had seen this coming. 4 months ago, when I noticed my laptop lagging after Dad's so-called help, I quietly took action. A coworker at my company, Marcus, a cybersecurity expert, once told me, if you suspect someone's watching, don't freak out. Go quiet and cut every exit route. I followed the advice. I bought a new MacBook with cash, never logging into any accounts linked to the old device. I went to a different bank, opened a private account under an intermediary company name, and asked them to advise me on how to move funds physically, leaving no digital transaction trail. I transferred the money in small batches. 5,000, 10,000, then 30,000. 3 weeks ago, when I reached $351,000, I stopped. The remaining amount, nearly $68,000, I left in the old account as bait. And they took it. When I got home, Rachel was waiting, with Ethan, my younger brother. He still looked stunned from the shock. I didn't blame him. He was a victim, not an accomplice. How did it go? Rachel asked. I sat down, exhaled deeply, and said calmly, they only got $38,000. Both of them widened their eyes. Ethan stammered, but I saw the report. It said the whole amount was transferred? I nodded. Yes, it was a transfer from the old account, but most of the money was already pulled out 3 weeks ago, moved through an internal system handled by an independent financial advisor. No one else knew, except you and the bank. Rachel hugged me tightly, her relief like a boulder lifted from her chest. Oh my God, Jen, you're brilliant. Ethan was still in disbelief. So, they thought they took everything, but only got what was left? I smirked. Let's call it tuition for the final lesson I gave them. I didn't feel triumphant, but I didn't feel guilty either. The only thing I felt was justice finally turning back after all the years they manipulated me, controlled every decision, turned my life into an equation they solved with my hand. That night, I wrote an email. I sent it to both of them. Douglas and Marilyn Clark. It was short, no drama. You've taken $38,000. I will not demand that money back. Consider it an unauthorized access fee. But if I don't receive confirmation within 24 hours that all spyware has been removed from my devices, along with a signed document pledging not to access my financial accounts ever again, I will proceed with legal action. Attached are all the supporting documents, monitoring IP logs, spyware activity records, unauthorized login history. A copy has been submitted to my attorney, another to the local police. See you in court if needed. Once I hit send, I shut my laptop. Rachel poured me a glass of red wine. I didn't drink it, just stared at the deep crimson liquid, thinking how for years they had drained every drop of trust from me, one drop at a time. Today, I took it all back. The next morning, a reply came, a single line from my father. I didn't think you could become so cold, but now I understand. I smiled, not out of victory, but because for the first time he used my name correctly. in a game where he used to be the only one writing the rules. I used to think taking your own parents to court was something that only happened in movies. But once you've been spied on, robbed of your life savings, and treated like someone's property, the line between family and justice is no longer blurry. 2 days after the confrontation, I walked into the office of Claire Sanderson, a lawyer who specializes in cybercrime and financial abuse within families, referred to me by Marcus, my coworker. She greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes full of resolve. "I've read the email and reviewed your evidence, Jennifer. I won't lie. This case is complicated, not just legally, but emotionally. But you have a very strong foundation." I laid out on her desk a copy of the system log showing when the spyware was installed, proof of the originating IP address, matching my parents' home Wi-Fi, bank statements showing unauthorized fund transfers, my father's confirmation message after getting caught. Claire nodded as she reviewed each document. "Good. We can proceed with charges on 3 main counts: invasion of privacy, unauthorized computer access, and personal financial fraud." I nodded slowly. I don't want revenge. I just want them to be held accountable. We filed the lawsuit the following Monday. Claire immediately submitted a request to freeze the bank accounts involved in the transfer to prevent them from using the remaining funds. I also signed a formal report with the Benton County Police Department, where the case was handed over to the Cybercrime Division. Word spread faster than I expected. 3 days later, I received an email from Easton School of Business where Ethan had applied for the MBA program. They were requesting confirmation of any legal bindings concerning the family's financial records. I didn't reply right away. I needed to speak to my brother in person. That evening, Ethan and I met at a small cafe by the Willamette River. It was drizzling outside, but the cafe was warm and filled with soft yellow lights. Ethan arrived a few minutes late, still holding a dripping umbrella. "You really filed a lawsuit against them?" he asked directly. "It's not about anger, it's about the truth," I replied. Ethan looked down, silent. After a while, he spoke, quietly. "I'm with you. If you need me to testify, I will. I'm tired of being favored my whole life, just because I'm the son, while you were treated like a criminal. They can't keep getting away with this." I reached for my brother's hand, feeling a small part of my old wound, just a part, start to heal. Claire was quick on her feet. She compiled a witness list including Ethan, Marcus, the coworker who advised me on security, and a forensic tech expert from the Digital Crimes Unit. The Benton County Court agreed to hear the case. I received the official court summons in mid-October. While we waited, my parents didn't reach out. No apologies, no justifications. But I knew they were preparing a defense. And I was right. A week later, Claire forwarded me the legal response from the defendants who had hired Claire. My parents had hired Alan K. Merrick, a lawyer known for his family over law tactics. In the official reply, they denied all charges and claimed, "Parents have the responsibility and right to intervene in their children's financial decisions if they believe the child is at risk of destroying their own assets or future." The funds were used to support Ethan Clark, who has a startup with high projected value, as a joint family investment. Claire tossed the printed response onto the table and scoffed. "They're trying to turn you from a victim into the disruptor of a system. We're going to show them that justice is not a family game." I nodded. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but at least I wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in my life, I felt strong enough to walk into a battle, not out of hatred, but because the truth deserved to be named. On the day of the hearing, I wore a light gray blazer, not to look powerful, but to remind myself that I had grown enough to stand before them, without lowering my gaze. The courtroom at Benton County was smaller than I expected. There was no jury, only Judge Margot Holloway, a silver-haired woman with piercing eyes behind metal-rimmed glasses. My parents sat at the opposite table. My father had his arms folded, face composed like he was at a board meeting. My mother avoided looking at me, eyes glued to a folder I doubted she could read a word of. Claire, my attorney began with a clear, no-frills statement. Your Honor, this is a case of severe invasion of personal privacy, unlawful seizure of legal property, and, above all, abuse of trust within a parent-child relationship. She laid out the evidence: the spyware installed from a source device at the Clark's home, unauthorized access to the bank account, and the email confession from my father. Next, Ethan, my younger brother, took the witness stand. His voice was steady, eyes unwavering. I never knew about or agreed to taking my sister's money. When I found out, I declined all financial help from my parents and took out student loans myself. Claire asked, "Did your parents ever threaten or pressure you after you refused?" Ethan took a deep breath. They said if I testified for my sister, they would cut off all financial support, including payments for my dog's cancer treatment. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I bowed my head, not in shame, but in sorrow. Not just for me, but for Ethan, too, who had also been twisted by loyalty to the two people who raised us. At the defense, represented by attorney Alan Merrick, tried everything to spin the narrative. He aimed to paint me as an emotional, rebellious daughter lacking financial sense, who needed firm guidance. "Do you admit your parents repeatedly warned you about the unstable housing market?" he asked during my testimony. "I admit they had opinions," I replied, "but opinions don't give them the right to spy on me using surveillance software and steal from my bank account." Judge Holloway took notes steadily, her eyes occasionally glancing up, sharp and assessing. A digital forensics expert was also called. He explained the spyware in detail: software that couldn't be casually downloaded, requiring high-level skills and physical device access. This perfectly aligned with the timeline of when my father had taken my laptop to fix it. When Claire finished, she said, "No one gets to choose their parents, but everyone has the right to live free from control, manipulation, and blatant violations, no matter who the perpetrator is." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Margot Holloway read the verdict at the end of the third day. With refuting all the evidence, testimonies, and context, the court finds the defendants, Mr. Douglas Clark and Mrs. Marilyn Clark, guilty of invading personal privacy, unlawfully accessing a private computer system, and illegally transferring assets. I held my breath. The defendants are ordered to repay the remaining $38,000, along with $50,000 in damages for emotional distress and legal expenses. Additionally, the defendants are prohibited from accessing the plaintiff's accounts, personal devices, or financial information in any form. That last sentence rang in my ears like a bell of liberation. The judge added, "The court also refers this case to the Benton County District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges due to the severity and systematic nature of the violations." I turned to Claire. She nodded slowly. "We did it." My father remained still. He said nothing, showed no reaction. My mother wiped her face with her hand, but I couldn't tell if she was wiping sweat or tears. I stepped out of the courtroom into the glowing afternoon sun. Someone asked if I felt triumphant. No, I felt relieved. For the first time in my life, I no longer lived in the shadow of control disguised as family. 3 months after the trial, Rachel and I moved into our first home, a 2-story European-style house in the suburbs of Silverton, just south of Portland. Not fancy or huge, but it had a sunlit backyard, a small office for me, and a cozy art room for her. I still remember the feeling of turning the key in the lock for the first time, hearing that soft click. No one monitoring, no one watching, no one needing to approve every decision. That was the sound of freedom. We didn't throw a housewarming party. It was just the two of us. A cheap bottle of wine, a box of pizza on an uncarpeted floor, and "This Must Be the Place" by Talking Heads playing softly. "This is our home," Rachel said, resting her head on my shoulder. "Truly ours." I got teary. not from happiness, but because I realized I was no longer afraid of peace. After the trial, I received a job offer from Craven Cybersecurity, a company specializing in privacy protection for individuals and nonprofits. They found me through a post I had written on a security forum, where I shared my experience of being surveilled by my own family. The hiring director was direct. "Jennifer, what you've lived through, no textbook can teach. We want you to help people living in that reality before they become victims." I said yes, not just for the salary, but because I knew pain, if it only exists, means nothing, but if it's transformed, it can save lives. I started at Craven as an emergency response specialist, helping people who had their privacy violated, especially by family or close acquaintances. Some cried during the first phone call when I said, "I believe you. What you're going through is real." I also launched a small blog called Digital Boundaries, where I shared my journey. No blame, no accusations, just honest stories. One post a week. Every word was real. The biggest surprise? I began receiving handwritten letters. One came from Vermont, from an elderly woman who wrote, "I lost over $100,000 to my son, but I never called it theft until I heard your story." Meanwhile, Ethan, my brother, moved to Bend to start fresh. He declined all support from our parents, secured scholarships, and worked part-time at a health tech startup while pursuing his MBA. "It's much harder," Ethan told me one night over the phone, "but it's my life." I felt proud, not because I won the lawsuit, but because my brother finally broke free from what looked like love, but was actually a cage. As for my parents, I've drawn clear boundaries. No surprise phone calls. No visits to my home. No mention of money, career choices, or my personal life in any form. They'd tried to cross that boundary a few times, sending emails, birthday cards with investment suggestions, even asking my aunt to call for a reconciliation talk. I refused them all, not with bitterness, but simply, I've learned how to love myself, and that doesn't include returning to those who made me lose trust in myself. I don't hate them anymore, but I don't need them in the next chapter of my life either. One autumn evening, Rachel knelt in the garden among rows of blooming yellow chrysanthemums and handed me a small silver box. No big wedding, no gown. I just want to wake up every day knowing I'm living with the person I chose, not out of pressure or duty, but love. I didn't answer right away. I just cried, then nodded. In the simplest way, the girl who once wasn't even allowed to choose the color of her own clothes, had finally chosen who would walk with me through life. A year after the trial ended, I stood in our backyard, where Rachel and I had just planted mustard greens, lettuce, and a few rows of lavender. A gentle breeze carried a light, sweet fragrance, like a soft whisper from the new life I had nurtured with my own hands. Someone once asked me, if I could go back, would I do anything differently? I've thought about it a lot. What if my father hadn't installed that spyware? What if my mother hadn't been complicit? What if they had just asked me instead of taking? But then I realized it was their betrayal that pushed me past the final comfort zone I clung to in that family bond. I'm no longer the girl who nodded through dinner to keep the peace. No longer the daughter who said yes just to avoid conflict. I'm Jennifer Clark, 31 years old, someone who built everything from the ground up. And more importantly, someone who learned how to protect herself, even when the threat came from inside her own home. I've learned a deep lesson that I hope you, the one reading this, will also remember. Family doesn't mean ownership. Love doesn't justify violation. And loyalty should never be built on fear. It's not easy to set boundaries, especially with parents, the ones who once changed your diapers, taught you to hold a spoon, drove you to school. But if they treat you like an asset, a financial plan, a subject of control, then that boundary might be the most essential form of self-love you'll ever practice. When I shared my story on the Digital Boundaries blog, I didn't expect hundreds of messages from across the country. A woman in Kansas wrote, "I let my mom control my entire paycheck for 10 years, thinking it was filial duty. But now I see I gave up my freedom." A young man from Seattle shared, "My dad monitors everything in our house through cameras. I used to think it was just concern. I realized I was not alone." And if you've read this far with a sting in your heart because something here feels like you, please remember, you have the right to step away. You have the right to choose again. You have the right to reclaim your life. No one, not even the people who gave you life, has the right to take that from you. As for my parents, our relationship is now a straight line, never intersecting. Polite calls have dwindled. Every Thanksgiving, I send a card without a return address. No more resentment, but no illusions either. I forgave them, not to ease their guilt, but so I could move forward without dragging the emotional wreckage of the past behind me. Rachel and I plan to register our marriage this coming spring. We'll have a small ceremony in the pine forest near Mount Hood, where I first told her, "I don't believe in family anymore." And she replied, "Then let's build one of our own, on trust." Ethan will be there. He's now co-founder of a small smart medical device startup, supporting himself with skill, not anyone else's expectations. And in his eyes, I'm no longer the sister who frowned at every rule, but the first person who dared to say enough. If you're in the middle of your own chaos, being watched, controlled, made to feel small, my story isn't here to scare you. It's here to remind you. Breaking free isn't easy, but it's possible. Start by asking one simple question. Am I living by my own choice or someone else's command? And if the answer hurts, then maybe it's time to stand up. Because the truth is, you deserve to live free, even if it means standing up to anyone. Don't forget to follow this channel to hear more powerful and heartfelt stories about family and life.